Big industry created in the steam engine and other machines the means of endlessly expanding industrial production, speeding it up and cutting its costs. The production thus facilitated the free competition which is necessarily bound up with big industry, assumed the most extreme forms. A multitude of capitalists invaded industry, and in a short while, more was produced than was needed. As a consequence, finished commodities could not be sold, and a so-called commercial crisis broke out. Factories had to be closed, their owners went bankrupt, and the workers were without bread. Deepest miseries reigned everywhere. After a time, the superfluous products were sold, the factories began to operate again, wages rose, and gradually business got better than ever. But it was not long before too many commodities were again produced and a new crisis broke out, only to follow the same course as its predecessor. Ever since the beginning of this century, the condition of industry has constantly fluctuated between periods of prosperity and periods of crisis. Nearly every 5 to 7 years, a fresh crisis has intervened, always with the greatest hardship for workers and always accompanied by general revolutionary stirrings and the direct peril to the whole existing order of things. Now this section is probably as straightforward can be. This explains the boom-bust cycles, albeit the word cycle is rather finicky in general to use, and this section also explains the crisis of capitalism. The boom-bust attitude, as summed up here, is overproduction and the lack of financial means to acquire the commodity. Thus, the market is saturated by the overflow of products and can't sell any of them. Thusly, the financial capital that was sent to the capitalist from the market dries up and later creates crisis. Thusly, why the Marxists call this the crisis of capitalism. At this point of crisis, one must note that this very contingent crisis nonetheless, showcases the failure of the chaos of production and the marketplace to even correct this error on their own without the express assistance from the government and without ending up in a depression. Or, in simpler terms, it showcases that the chaotic production of commodities and the marketplace themselves cannot fix this very error of overproduction and saturation. Thus, everything contributing to production and the shipment of goods to the markets declines and will eventually lead up to poverty, which will ensue due to the lack of variable capital needed to help reproduce the labor power in a role and the constant capital needed to run the machines. Thus, why Marxists call this the crisis of capitalism, as aforementioned. They call this as such, albeit what I'm giving here right now is a superficial explanation, nonetheless a necessary superficial explanation, is because the marketplace acts as a means to get a commodity to the members of society, mainly composed of the proles and capitalists, what they need and what they want, but fails to do so along with capitalist production as a whole. Ultimately, there is no need to blame the capitalists, as this is well established within the parameters of capitalism and is needed to help reproduce capitalism. They do such by burning fictitious capital, debt, and erasing unspent surplus value that helped create this very situation. If they fail to do such, the crisis only worsens. And I only mean burning in the sense of converting fictitious capital, debt, into financial capital, not in the literal sense of completely erasing it, albeit that debt is erased into something that is more useful as such. Yet this very surplus amount of commodities remains, as what ultimately seems, at first, to help steer the economy back to the growth stage from its depressive stage. But to look deeper, one must remember that the marketplace is a realm of equality between the seller and buyer, as long as both can play their parts and the opposers' roles. To add on to that, what is given up is rewarded with something declared of equal value, or there's a zero-sum exchange between the buyer and the seller. I give up something in order to gain something, and I gain something by giving up something. Money, the universal commodity that ties all commodities with each other in some way in all marketplaces, ultimately will always equal the commodity in money value and in exchange value, despite the actual labor and resources went into crafting both commodities. For the pieces of papyruses that were crafted in order to be strung together into a dollar, and the resources that were gathered up in a mine, a farm, or a forest into creating this specific commodity. Thusly, there's more than the wholesale of surplus commodities that is in play here that helps recover the economy from its depressive stage, from its bust stage. Thus, one can see the will of capital regaining its strength plays a crucial role in such recovery. It recovers as such by capitalists gaining their flow of financial capital actualized once more from the marketplace, once those markets can sell the surplus commodities off. What they have originally overproduced is coming back to help them get out of this crisis. The next step, or really the next movement the next sub-movement that happens in this movement is when the capitalist realizes that this flow cannot be sustained by the overproduction that they have created earlier, and will have to reinvest capital to rebirth the MCM circuit into something of what it used to be, and into something it can be more than what it used to be, while ensuring that the marketplace doesn't suffer as the circuit is being healed up. These investments usually are meant to bump up constant machine capital and variable wages, exempli grantia capital, at the cost of the surplus value that they have originally created before the crisis had settled in, which, and all these forces that culminate with each other, makes the crisis resolved for the time being. Then this very illness appears to be cured, and all appears to be well and good for all involved within the capitalist social order. The capitalists can stroke that capitalism works fine and society is none the wiser to such as they can finally feel relieved and feel alive again to function another day. Yet, the crisis of capitalism doesn't get negated when the crisis is resolved. But the statement isn't anti-dialectical by any means. As stated earlier in the series, a dialectically positive supersession does occur, and it has occurred in this situation, because it is one of the many cases where a positive supersession do occur. The conditions for another crisis like this will not be the same as the original crisis or the preceding crisis. It is because new content is generated out of this crisis and out of the positive supersession from the crisis that further adds to the reasoning of the will of capital and those that theorize about such, and those that equally live within such as well. Now capitalism has an avenue to rebirth, that is, reproduce itself, and not worry about a slow economic death. But at what cost? For this cost is the hypocrisy of this reproduction. For this reproduction is another avenue that brings its whole host of contingencies and unforeseen consequences. This dialectically positive supersession is time-bound in relationship to the increase of production and the increase of saturation in the market, which then guarantees misery and a decline in production overall until the situation is corrected before a revolutionary situation forms. But this very act, no matter how long it lasts, will act as a medium that helps create and entices more radicals to join the movement to the abolishment, a dialectically negative supersession of capitalism in a new social order. First, that, though big industry in its earliest stage created free competition, it is now ungrown free competition, that for big industry, competition and generally the individualistic organization of production have become a fetter which it must and will shatter. That, so long as big industry remains on its present footing, it can be maintained only at the cost of general chaos every 7 years, each time threatening the whole of civilization and not only plunging the proletarians into misery, but also ruining large sections of the bourgeoisie. Hence, either that big industry must itself be given up, which is an absolute impossibility, or that it makes unavoidably necessary an entirely new organization of society in which production is no longer directed by mutually competing individual industrialists, but rather by the whole society operating according to a definite plan and taking account of the needs of all. Second, that big industry and the limitless expansion of production which it makes possible bring within the range of feasibility a social order in which so much is produced that every member of society will be in a position to exercise and develop all his powers and faculties in complete freedom. It thus appears that the very qualities of big industry which, in our present-day society, produce misery and crises are those which, in a different form of society, will abolish this misery and these catastrophic depressions. We see with the greatest clarity that all these evils are from now on to be ascribed solely to a social order which no longer corresponds to the requirements of the real situation, and that it is possible through a new social order to do away with these evils altogether. Now, The first part of Section 3 does appear to be a repeat of Section 12 to large degrees, but Section 3 homes in on the depression part of the positive superseding movement that is the boom-bust attitude. What stands out is the ending of this subsection. That is, the subject can make an incorrect perceptual understanding that both statements are one-to-one, except in the amount of detail for each part. That is to say, one can incorrectly perceive, at first, that they think that Engels is saying that the bourgeoisie will never give up industries to the pro, as is. But rather one clearly sees that it means the bourgeoisie, along with society, will choose not to not revert back to the feudal mercantile base of society. However, this very signification that the bourgeoisie will never give up the means of production is still true in its essence. However, there's a mistake, a correct mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. Getting back on track, however, the following part is where this correct mistake should have been, and not in the first part of this subsection. Of this sentence, sorry. The following part is what everyone tends to perceive correctly, except if you're the enemy, of course. That is to say, a condition for the liberation of the proletariat is established here and makes concrete our notion for grief of communism. In particular, a distinction of the class character that helps discriminate, that is to say, really separate, helps us understand and separate between capitalist and communist production. Keep in mind, a mode of production is different from production, and the mode of production always comes after the class character of the production is established. Yet, the second part, the second subsection to Section 13, is worth even more analysis for the finer points of criticism and praise of capitalism. Firstly, on the production of industry as resulted by the capitalist production done by the pros. Industry appears to overproduce, create surplus commodities, without markets, and the will of capital functions for both the pro and the capitalists trying to understand the forces of capitalism to best survive such systems. In that vein, one can dream of a society that is post-scarcity without the need or the use of markets. One where one can self-determine their own legacy and live another day growing without the fear of death and without the fear of poverty as such. But what has been shown by the very existence of this social order? Death, destruction, and a breakdown of the will of capital for a while, whenever it approaches a boom-bust attitude. Thusly, Engels can affix two new predicates to communism's essence. The first being that it is not the one that creates the crisis of capitalism, nor the preceding social orders that came before the capitalist social order. The second being that it will abolish the ills of capitalism, change production's class character that is less resembling of the capitalist class character, and enforce the workers' class essence, the working class's essence, in the medium of a new social order that will guarantee the full existence of communism. Truly, communism is the real movement which abolishes the present state of things, as Marx puts it.